from NJ.com, this is Talk is Cheap, a New York Giants podcast. We're talking Big Blue football all year round.
Welcome aboard, Giants fans, to episode 115 of the Talk is Cheap podcast. I'm James Cratch. Here with me, as always, is Dan Duggan. Joe Giglio is off today, so we've got a two-man podcast, and we will start with the Giants' crushing, heartbreaking 34-29 loss to the Philadelphia Eagles on Sunday at MetLife Stadium. Although it felt like Lincoln Financial Field, Dan, because Eagles fans invaded the place. The Giants had plenty of opportunities to win, but yet again, they found a way to lose.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. We saw this coming weeks ago that you looked at the schedule, a bunch of NFC East teams that traveled pretty well coming in here in December. Thought it could be like that. But still, it was a little bit surprising to hear Eli Manning say after the game that he excused Bobby Hart's false start, in a crucial spot because, the offensive line couldn't hear the cadence. I mean, he said Brett Jones, the center, couldn't hear the cadence. I mean, that's something that I don't think visiting teams really ever deal with when they come to MetLife Stadium. The Giants' home crowd doesn't make it that tough on the opponent, and yet in their own building, they have to deal with noise. So just another kind of microcosm of, how sideways this season has gone. Of course, that penalty on Hart was huge because they're looking at 4th and goal from the 6 and a chance to, pull out a dramatic win, which, ultimately wouldn't have meant, much, but it would have been a big lift for, Steve Spagnuolo and just kind of this team that, did continue to fight. You give them credit for that. But then they get backed up and Eli's sort of in a desperation situation there, throws it to Ingram. I mean, they could have made a call there. I don't think it was nearly as flagrant as the Giants did when they, everyone kind of lost their minds. There was a little hand fighting, which happens on pretty much every play, and would have been tough, I think, to throw the flag there because the defensive back kind of, released Ingram in time, and the ball was in the air. So I think that was probably a good no call. Obviously, Sterling Shepard disagreed. But even that, I'll say, hey, it's a good sign that, they were still showing passion. They didn't just, slink back to the sidelines and accept their fate. I mean, they did, they did care. They did want to win. But in the big picture, being 2-12 is better for this franchise, long term than it would have been, being 3-11 because obviously they're not going anywhere either way. So they fought hard and they preserved the number 2 pick in the draft. So sort of a win-win when you look at it like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the rational Giant fan will look at it and say that everything is a pretty good day for the Giants. They played hard, exciting game. Eli Manning was brilliant. So all the Eli fans got to see, maybe his last glorious performance as a Giant, and they still lost. So they didn't give up any ground in the race for the number 2 overall pick, which is, I think, the pick that's in the best interest of the franchise that they get. We'll talk about that later on with the kind of draft scenarios. But I think the best place to start, because as you said, not a game that means much. We'll get into the special teams disaster later on. Eli Manning. Earlier in the week, John Mara said he wants to have him back in 2018 after all the mayhem that has occurred over the past few weeks. Eli goes out and plays his best game of the season by far. Just kind of torches the Eagles, the defense that came in ranked 2nd in the league. And after the game, Eli says that he loves to be a Giant and he wants to be back in 2018. But Dan, I can't help but think 2 things. One, this all seems like it might be a case of everyone just saying the right thing until there's some definites going forward. But 2, for everyone to say they want Eli back when they're going to have a top two pick in all likelihood, when they have Davis Webb on the roster, when they don't even have a general manager and a head coach, to me it just seems a little early, a little presumptuous.
Yeah, and I mean, we weren't down in Texas for the owners meeting, so we can't parse everything that John Mara said when he met with reporters, but I think he did add a pretty big disclaimer where he said yes, he wants Eli back, but he said it's going to be a discussion with whoever becomes the GM and the head coach, as it should be. I mean, you certainly don't want John Mara, putting Eli Manning as a prerequisite to anyone who comes in. You have to have him as your starting quarterback for the next year or two. I mean, you need to let that be an open discussion because there was going to be a debate, even if Jerry Reese was back, which obviously didn't happen. It might have been a long shot. It certainly was going to be a debate. I mean, so nothing really should change. And one great performance shouldn't change anything about the outlook for Eli Manning. I know some people are trying to say, oh, he still got it. Well, I mean, yeah, he had a great performance against the Eagles in Week 3. So something about that matchup seems to suit him well. But I mean, he's also had 3 terrible performances coming into yesterday. And again, I'm not saying that, I just don't think the game's a referendum on Eli Manning either way. I mean, we've documented how shorthanded this offense is with the offensive line, with all the skill players being out. So yeah, hey, it was great to give the home team and the home crowd a show. But yeah, I don't think this performance should change the long-term outlook. It's more about, kind of dollars and cents, and it's about the draft pick. I mean, I have no problem if they bring Eli Manning back next year. And I think another thing that people don't really want to entertain, and I know you kind of broke it down last week, there's no guarantee that they get a quarterback, even with the second pick. I mean, the key domino is Sam Darnold. If he stays in school, that throws such a monkey wrench into things, because then you have to figure, Rosen hands down goes number 1 to the Browns. And then, I don't want any part of Baker Mayfield, period. I know a lot of fans do. I don't know if the Wyoming quarterback, his name escapes right now. Was it Josh Allen?
Allen, yep.
Yeah, I don't think he's worthy of being the number 2 pick. I don't think Lamar Jackson's worthy of being the number 2 pick. So it really comes down to what Darnold's decision does, how much of a slam dunk it is that they even take a quarterback at 2. But even if they take him, I still would be fine, with Eli being back for 1 year, sort of a bridge year, and let the kid learn kind of the way, Davis Webb, has learned this year. But I think that's all stuff, for another day. Again, once a GM is in place, once a head coach is in place, I don't think we should be getting carried away with one, excellent performance. I mean, he played very well. It was great to see. Doesn't change, my long-term outlook for, what Eli Manning, his future with the franchise should be.
No, it doesn't change mine either, but I do think that you're always starting to hear these fans, like, oh, if they just put an offensive line behind Eli and he's still got it. To me, what I don't understand about, and I don't think people are really considering this, is, okay, that's fine. You bring Eli back, you draft a quarterback, whatever. At some point next year, if you draft Sam Darnold or you don't, or Josh Rosen, or you don't take a quarterback and you just have Davis Webb, if this team is not in a playoff hunt, which I think there's a very good chance it won't be, and even if it is, at some point you've got to play the young quarterback, especially if he's a top number 2 overall pick. It's very rare in today's NFL that a rookie quarterback that's drafted that high sits on the bench for a year. And we already saw it once, what a mess it was when they went away from Eli Manning. So, 2, how are you going to do that going forward? And another thing is, Eli might want to be a Giant, but he wants to play football. And I just have a hard time imagining that it's a good situation to bring Eli back here with a number 2 overall pick, knowing that at some point you're going to have to send Eli to the bench because that's the way it works in the league now. The kid is going to play at some point. I wonder if everyone says, well, is Eli willing to be Kurt Warner? Well, here's the issue. You already kind of played that chip when you benched him for Geno Smith. So I don't see how it's going to work out that Eli is going to come back next year knowing that at some point they're probably going to pull the rug out from under him again for this draft pick, and he's going to be willing to go with that. I just think there's a lot of issues at play here, and I think people are getting way too caught up in the fact that at the end of the day, the GM's not here in all likelihood, the head coach is not here in all likelihood, and those are the guys who have to make this call. And that's great that Eli wants to be here. It's great that John Mara wants him to be here. But if the Giants are going to function and rebuild this thing, the 2 people who need to make the decision for the most part, they're not in the building yet.
Right, and it goes back to the point that, myself and you have been kind of banging this drum that they've botched this quarterback situation, so badly on both sides of the coin. I mean, if they were just going to ride it out with Eli for all 16 games this season, I mean, hey, people would have been calling for Davis Webb to play, but people also would understand, Eli has his streak and it's not right to yank him, this and that. And hey, we'll see what happens in the offseason. I think everyone would have understood if that's how they chose to approach it. Once they made, again, we can't keep reliving this every week on the podcast, but that ill-fated plan to just yank Eli, put Smith in there. I mean, the damage was done. The bandit had been ripped off. I mean, they'd already kind of crossed that bridge with Eli, and that was going to be such a difficult thing to do. And especially if you're bringing in a new GM and a new coach, they would have been. We saw what happened to Ben McAdoo and Jerry Reese's reputation after that happened. It would have been a tough look for Dave Gettleman, let's say, to come in, who has a reputation for kind of being cold with older players. If he came in and his first order of business was to cut Eli Manning, my goodness, that would have been a very difficult thing for him to overcome. So they did the first step. They took that off of the new GM, and they've just totally reversed it. And again, I've made this point many times. I'm not going to hammer it too much, but it really is remarkable. I mean, they had done this impossible task of sliding Eli, out of the starting role. It was not a popular decision, and then they just backed down because of the public sentiment. And now the fact that now he's playing well. So now, I mean, Spags was going to play Eli no matter what I'm sure John Mara, whether he's going to admit or not, gave a nudge that, hey, it'd sure be nice to see number 10 back in there for that Cowboys game last week. And now Eli plays, lights out. How are you going to take him out now? I mean, again, if Spags, this whole thing is obviously playing to win, he's got no choice but to play a guy who just threw for 400 plus yards and kept them in the game against the NFC's best team. So they're kind of just back to where they started, which is it's just an amazing turn of events in 3 weeks. How much changed and how much again is just right back to where they started, and they're really no closer to resolving their quarterback situation. And again, like we keep saying, nothing's going to be resolved until they get a new GM, until they get a new head coach. But that new GM and head coach is going to have just as sticky a situation now, based on the fact that they just totally backtracked on the process they had started down a couple of weeks ago. Yeah,
I wrote this last week. The idea that they've made this whole quarterback situation about winning the game, this boxes the bin. I mean, if Spags came out and said, I'm starting Eli against the Cowboys and the Eagles because it's in the best interest of the Giants, well, then he could have come out after this game, Monday, and said, I'm going to start Davis Webb now because it's in the best interest of the Giants. But when you say I'm starting Eli because he gives us the best chance to win, you really can't then turn around and say, well, we're starting Webb now, because obviously you can't argue that he gives you a better chance to win than Eli, especially coming off this big game. And I think give Ben McAdoo credit. I think it's become plainly obvious that he believed that Geno gave him a better chance to win than Eli against the Raiders. But he didn't come out and say that because he knew he couldn't win that argument. And you mentioned the new GM, the new head coach. I don't think John Mara meant to do this, but it's almost like he's tainting the pool of candidates in the sense that if you're interviewing for this job as an outside candidate, GM or head coach, don't you kind of feel compelled to come in with a plan that involves Eli Manning going forward when you hear the owner say, I want this guy back, and Eli Manning, who basically you've seen what happens when you try to move on from Eli Manning, has said he wants you back? I mean, I almost feel like I don't think John Mara's made it a litmus test that the new GM and coach must be on board with Eli, but it's almost like you're tying their one hand behind their back before they even have a chance to take the job.
Yeah, no, I mean that just speaks to my point where I said it's just amazing. They did the heavy lifting. They got rid of the guys who you can pin it on, and then they just went right back and they're back to where they started. So it really makes that decision to bench Eli before the Raiders game so pointless now, because it really accomplished absolutely nothing other than expediting the move to get McAdoo and Reese out the door, which again that doesn't really gain you much other than people are just tired of looking at him. And it speaks to another point that with Spags, I honestly think it's a detriment for this team in the position they were in to have an interim head coach. And I sent a tweet that wasn't, worded great, and people jumped on me on Sunday morning that the problem with interim coach is Spags is going all out to win. And people say, well, wouldn't McAdoo have gone all out to win? Yes. So I shouldn't have said all out to win. My thought process is, though, Spags has 4 games to make an impression. He's not going to start experimenting. He's going to go with tried and true and just hope that, he can change things enough to, win a couple of games, or even, hey, maybe that Philly game. I'm sure John Mara appreciated the effort he saw on the field, which obviously hasn't been the case for some of the games this season. But Spags isn't going to, deviate from the veterans and the trusted guys. So he's going to start Eli Manning. He's going to play Vernon and JPP every snap, even though he said he wasn't going to do that. He's just going to lean on sort of the formula that's been the plan all year, and hopefully it has different results for him. At least with McAdoo. I mean, he saw the writing on the wall, so he was going to experiment. And again, that's what a team that at the time was 2-10 should be doing. It's so hard for me to understand why that's so hard for some people to grasp. It's not about tanking. Giving Avery Moss, let's just say, a 5th-round pick who's shown a little bit of promise, giving him 20 snaps in yesterday's game at the expense of 10 snaps from JPP and 10 snaps from Vernon, that's not tanking. I mean, you can make an argument that maybe it makes the veterans better because they're a little rested, and maybe Moss brings a spark, but stuff like that is just what you do. It's very rare to be in a situation where you're playing in meaningless games. There's no other way to describe these games. If they won yesterday, again, it wouldn't have meant anything other than maybe hurting their draft stock. These are meaningless games. So use that to your advantage. I mean, they've given Wayne Gallman a little bit more reps, but they dressed Darius Powell from the practice squad last week. Obviously, he got hurt, but those are the things you should do. And I just feel like Spags is much more hesitant to do that because, again, he's got 4 games to try to convince ownership that, hey, I should be the guy. So you can't fault him for sticking with Eli because, of course, Eli gives him a better chance to win than Davis Webb. Now, yes, McAdoo was going to have to go all out to win, but he was also in a different position where he was a lot more desperate and a lot more willing to try different things. And I just think that for these 4 games, that would have benefited in the long term. Again, everyone knows that we both support the idea of playing Davis Webb. That's completely out the window. Spags again has said Eli's going to start against Arizona. I mean, maybe they promote Webb to number 2. I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. But just the idea that they've gotten to this point where you never want to be, where you're totally out of the race in like mid-November, and you don't even take advantage of it by giving more young players a shot, taking some chances, mixing things up a little bit. To me, it's like it's even more of a waste, and it's kind of like I said, the downside of having an interim coach who isn't gonna take any chances because he, we go back to last week when he's punting, 4th and 2 from the 37 or whatever it was. I mean, Spags is playing this very close to the vest because he wants to win these games. Not that McAdoo didn't want to win, but he definitely would have taken more chances, taken more risks, mixed things up a little bit, which again I think is what a team in their position should be doing.
The Giants just seem to be obsessed with and John Mara. I mean, when John Mara had that after Eli got benched and he was like, we're not tanking, that's complete BS. I can't remember a single person who had written or said or accused the Giants of tanking up to that point. Right. They seem to be kind of fixated with the idea of being perceived as tanking, but I don't think anyone's accusing them of tanking. But here's the thing. Tanking is purposely losing a game. That's bad. That's unethical. I get that. But if you put younger players in, you are naturally going to decrease your chances of winning games. And I think we all agree that the best case of the Giants at this point is to get as high of a draft pick as possible while still evaluating. I mean, you can put Davis Webb in the game and then do everything you can to win the game within the white lines. But you're still, A, decreasing your chance of winning ultimately, which helps your draft status, and B, getting something valuable out of the equation. And I just think for whatever reason the Giants are struggling to realize that there is a difference between tanking and doing what you have to do in a losing season and understand that you might be giving up, on the margins a chance to win the game, but you're doing good inside the white lines and you're still playing to win the game.
Right. And then not to kind of, review the Webb situation again, but that's how I look at it too. It's not like you'd put him in there and just tell him to throw up Hail Marys all game. You'd still, come up with a conservative game plan, pretty much what they had done with Eli until they really let him loose yesterday. And it's really amazing. Like Philly other teams have to be watching the film. That's 2 games now where Eli Manning just shredded them with that quick passing, up tempo, and a lot of underneath stuff and some double moves. A great game plan by Mike Sullivan. I'll give him credit there. But if you put Webb in the game, you're gonna try and play to his strengths. You're gonna try and win. You're not gonna just say, whatever, he's in there, who cares? So again, that just goes to that whole argument. I don't buy it that you'd be tanking by playing a young player. I mean, yeah, you wouldn't be giving yourself the best chance to win, but you can't win with the best players out, quote unquote best players out there. You're 2-12, playing things by the book. So I just keep going back to the reasoning of what do you have to lose? I mean, you can say, there's nothing to gain. Well, I mean, there's at least a chance. Maybe Webb goes in and lights it up. Odds certainly stacked against that. But even if he stinks, I mean, the team is 2-12. It's until yesterday, the offense had been a disaster. So just really nothing to lose. Again, just even some of the decisions, like the fact that Landon Collins played yesterday. I mean, I know he is a tough guy, and he has started every single game of his career. It was going to take the Giants. The thing is crazy. Spags admitted what it was going to take to keep him out of the lineup. He said we'd have to protect Landon from himself because he won't ever say I can't go. So he goes out, does his pregame workout, convinces the medical staff he can play, and then midway through the second quarter, he's limping off the field because he's trying to play through an ankle injury that's been nagging since week 5 that he re-injured last week, and you're going to play him in that game. It just seems like so short-sighted. And, I mean, listen, it's an ankle. So it's the type of thing that typically heals on its own. But man, if he has to have some sort of off-season ankle surgery and it's because he aggravated it, in week 15 in a meaningless game when he was already less than 100%, that wouldn't be a great look. So I just think, like I said, that they're so obsessed with this idea of not looking like they're tanking. They're just losing sight of the big picture, that at least the one thing that, McAdoo and Reese on the way out the door seem to have some idea that, listen, we have to at least start to look at the future. I mean, it's okay. That's not tanking. That's not against the, kind of the unwritten rules of the game to just start to take a peek at the future. And the fact that they've just, backtracked on that so much, and hey, they played their A unit yesterday, they gave it all they got and they still lost. So, they don't gain anything from that. And they've just, lost another opportunity, to evaluate these young players.
Yeah, it's just, I feel like it's just like this repeating cycle of, I just feel like some people see it how we do, others don't. The Giants, I wonder sometimes if they even really have a plan. They just are kind of going day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute. You're right, playing Collins made absolutely no sense on Sunday, and they basically said, we know this makes no sense, but then they did it anyway. It's a ready, fire, aim team. I just think they need this season to mercifully come to an end, and they can go get a new GM, a new head coach, and kind of forge forward and try to forget that this ever happened, because this has been a complete nightmare.
Yeah, and a new special teams coordinator too.
Yes. We have to get to that. I mean, you know what? Enough is enough. I mean, it's just at this point, look, the game didn't mean anything. The Giants are better off losing it. But they would have beaten the Eagles, pulled a colossal upset. Honestly, you could make the argument that the Giants had beaten the Eagles on Sunday. It would have been their biggest win in years, given the fact – I mean, not take away the fact the Giants were 2-11 going in, but the Eagles, NFC leaders, division champs, going for home field advantage, even with the fact that Nick Foles is there and Carson Wentz wasn't. But you lose by 5 points in a game where you had a blocked field goal and a blocked PAT, basically leave 5 points on the board, off the board, and you had a blocked punt set up a short field touchdown by the Eagles. I mean, it's just the Giants special teams have been bad all year, but I feel like this was the game where it really crystallized into a complete debacle that cost them a win. And at this point, I mean, this has to be the end of the Tom Quinn era, right?
I mean, he's got 9 lives. I mean, we used to say that about Jerry Reese. Obviously, he outlasted Tom Coughlin, but how did Tom Quinn survive? I mean, Ben McAdoo must not have any special teams coaches in his Rolodex, from his climb up the ladder to just keep Tom Quinn. It's been a sore spot for this team for years. Yesterday certainly was probably one of the lowest points, but I mean, again, I think I assume whatever coach comes in is just going to wipe the entire staff. And again, I've said maybe a guy and who's a position coach and he has a relationship with whoever the new coach is and that type of, like a Dave Merritt or someone like that sticks around, maybe. But all the coordinators have to go. I mean, they're among the worst in the league in all 3 phases. So you can't say, well, at least this coordinator's done a good job this year. They've all been bad. They've all underachieved. But Tom Quinn definitely probably skates by the most because, listen, it's special teams. I mean, everyone focuses on offense and defense, and you really only focus on special teams when something, extraordinary happens, whether, for the good or for the bad. And the funny thing is, I mean, the blocks were, horrendous. And probably the most troubling part for the Tom Quinn factor in it all is Malcolm Jenkins, who blocked the Rosas' field goal, said, we spotted some things on film and exploited it. So it wasn't just as if a guy beat a guy one-on-one. They realized where the weak spots were and exploited them over and over again. I mean, you don't see 2 block kicks in the game, let alone 3. So clearly they got out-coached and out-schemed there. And then it's not just these big plays. If you just look at, where they rank, they're down in the bottom of the league in kick return average, punt return average. Tell me the last time they've broken a long return. I mean, their longest punt return was 20 yards. The longest kick return is 30 yards for the season. I mean, they're barely, making any plays in the return game. So, listen, it's a formality that when the season ends, Tom Quinn will be showing the door. But I think it's just he's been such a source of frustration because fans can't believe, he survived this long. And then to have a game like yesterday, it was such a debacle, and it just really, drove home the point that, he's certainly underachieved as special teams coordinator.
I mean, and my thing is this. When you have a blocked kick or 3 block kicks, I mean, it's inexcusable. I mean, anyone who's kind of like played football at any level, has special teams experience. I mean, this is not something where you're right, where there's just a guy made a freak physical play. I mean, and sometimes that happens, but and look, I don't know what the exact blocking scheme was. It just seemed to me that the Eagles brought one extra guy on the side on one side of the formation a couple times, and the Giants just didn't account for it. I mean, that's it. I mean, it's difficult to kick an extra point or a field goal or get a punt off, but it's pretty rudimentary football. That you've got to block this guy, and that you always block inside because the guy on the outside is probably never going to be able to get to the kicker quick enough unless he's an all-pro athlete. So, I mean, and that was what happened, I think, definitely on the PAT, where Eric Flowers, and look, I don't know if it's Eric Flowers' fault because it looked like he was punching inside, but the guy just goes, I think it was Derek Barnett, just goes right off his shoulder and walks into the kick. I mean, the punt, I know Nat Burhay was out, so I mean, Nat Burhay has really proven to be a valuable special teams player this year. Darian Thompson there is personal protector, but I mean, if a guy is running straight at you, you should probably hit him before he blocks the kick. I mean, they've had kicks blocked before this year, punts and field goals. I just think it just seemed like they were very poorly coached. I put those block kicks on coaching rather than the players because it just seemed like they just didn't react to what the Eagles were doing. The Eagles had clearly seen it on film, schemed them up, and I just think that, look, it's just unacceptable. It doesn't really mean anything, but imagine if the Giants had been on the periphery of the wild card hunt and this had happened on Sunday. I don't think Tom Quinn would be this coordinator on Monday afternoon if that was the case. I mean, just unacceptable to do that in a game that you should have won. It just the Giants have to get these special teams fixed going forward. Maybe that means seriously considering, Kansas City special teams coordinator Dave Tobe, guy who's from Westchester County, has a long-running relationship with Spags, actually dating back to their time at Springfield College in Massachusetts. So if the Giants want to keep Steve Spagnuolo in the fold, and I agree with you, I don't really see how they can keep any of the coordinators. I mean, the Giants' defense is 32nd ranked. I do think there's a chance, especially if Eli is back, that maybe Mike Sullivan finds a spot on the staff as a quarterback's coach just because of the relationship they have and that he can help Eli kind of transition to another offensive scheme. But beyond that, I don't see any of these guys coming back at the coordinator level.
Yeah, I mean, I could live with Sully back as a QB coach, not as offensive coordinator. I think whoever comes in, if it's an offensive guy, and I mean, I think we saw that the calling the plays didn't work for McAdoo, but maybe it can work for whoever the new head coach is. But even if it's not, he needs to bring somebody in who has his own system or is going to run the head coach's system, where Sully was just a square peg forcing a round hole from the get-go with McAdoo. But that's probably more than enough on that game. That again, it was exciting, it was interesting, but ultimately meaningless. I think the bigger story of this week is going to be the GM search is finally going to kind of get off the ground. It's not going to be resolved this week, or at least we don't think it will be. That'll be a change in what John Mara said the plan is, but they are going to begin the process, which is one of the things Mara said. He felt like, by firing, Reese and Macker during the season, they had a little bit of an advantage that they could get a head start. I mean, obviously the Browns kind of negated that a little bit and just kind of jumping the line and hiring John Dorsey in the blink of an eye. Don't think he would have been a favorite for the Giants job, but was going to get an interview. So, you can't drag your feet too long. Obviously the Bengals, they're going to move off from Marvin Lewis. So that market's going to get crowded pretty quickly. So at least makes sense to get a little bit of a jump start. I mean, I think the names we all expect to see this week, are definitely Dave Gettleman because he's unemployed, so he can interview this week. They can interview the in-house candidates, Kevin Abrams. I would assume Mark Ross gets an interview. Just a fact that Mark Ross would satisfy the Rooney Rule requirement too. So just kind of a no-brainer to give him an interview. And then, I don't know if there's any other names out there, Louis Riddick or Scott McLuhan, something like that, who's not currently employed by an NFL front office, could interview this week. We haven't really heard anything to indicate that that'll be the case. And then it should really pick up steam the first week of the new year after the regular season ends, and they can start interviewing executives that are currently working for other teams. But this is definitely going to pick up fast. I think it's going to be interesting to see how everything plays out. I think we all kind of enter the process here thinking Gettleman's the favorite. But I think the Giants are doing the right thing, at least in, presumably waiting. We'll see. Maybe Gettleman just really knocks their socks off and they pull the trigger this week. But I think presumably they'll wait and talk to some other guys around the league, and we'll see how everything shakes out in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And another in-house name, and I don't know for a fact if he'll be interviewed, is that I read somewhere, I think it was an interview Ernie Accorsi did when he was consulting the Lions, where he said that he doesn't really consider a candidate unless they've been a director at some level in a front office. So Giants director of pro personnel, Ken Sternfeld, I haven't heard his name anywhere, but this kind of jumped with me that he's the only other kind of director level guy in the Giants front office. Maybe he could end up being a candidate. I haven't heard anything that suggests that, but that's just one nugget. I do think that it'll be interesting to me to see. Obviously, it sounds like they're going to wait until after the season ends to interview some of these candidates. But how many candidates do they want to interview on other teams, and like how long are they willing to go? One thing that helps the Giants is it looks like the Packers are not going to make the playoffs, so that means that a guy like Elliott Wolf will be able to interview relatively quickly if he wants to once the regular season ends. But again, a guy like Nick Caserio, Eric DeCosta with the Ravens, if he's interested, those teams are probably going to be in the playoffs. And, teams don't necessarily have to let their front office executives interview until till that team's season is over. It's not like with the coaching candidates where they've got the cutouts of, if you have a bye week, you can interview that week. Any coach on a playoff team who's in the first round can interview right after that first round game is over, something like that. So I'm intrigued to see, how long would the Giants be willing to wait to talk to certain candidates if that team says, no, we're not going to grant the permission until after our season is over. Because I think if this all works out for the Giants, they probably would like to have the new GM hired, I would assume, before wild card weekend, so they can kind of hit the ground running from there with their head coaching interviews. I also wonder if, based on time, for instance, if they're interested in a guy like Josh McDaniels, would they do an initial interview with McDaniels before they've hired the GM, just to kind of get the ball rolling with a candidate like him, knowing that they always can double back for a second interview later on in the postseason whenever the Patriots get knocked out.
Yeah, I could see that. I agree with kind of your timeline. I think it'll be decided, by wild card weekend. So, we talk about waiting to do all those interviews till, probably after the first of the year when the regular season ends. I don't think they'll drag their feet, especially when you have to do a GM and a coach. You got to have that GM in place before you hire the coach. So you just really can't drag your feet again. I mean, they have a list. If we think Gettleman's at the top of it, there's really no reason to drag it out too long. But at the same time, it's pretty unprecedented. I mean, they've never been through this process, so we can't say, this is what they did last time, because they've never been in a position where they're looking, outside, most likely at least, for a GM. So we can't predict exactly how to go down. But I think that that'll come together pretty quickly. And then the head coach, that'll be interesting, because there isn't an obvious guy that, say, Gettleman would bring along with them, or even if, say Kevin Abrams gets promoted, and you'd think hopefully he wouldn't just say, I'll just keep Spags, but there's no kind of tag team that Gettleman would automatically come with. So how wide of a net would he want to search for a head coach, assuming he does get the job? So it's going to be a very interesting offseason. I mean, this has certainly been an interesting regular season, and it's going to be a busy January for us, I'm sure, trying to track down how everything's going to shake out. Because, I mean, these next two hires are going to shape the franchise for years to come, because it's not just these two guys. They're going to end up making monumental decisions right out of the gates, what they do with the top pick, what they do with Odell's contract, what they do with Eli. So it's going to be fascinating to see, how this all plays out.
Yeah, I think that obviously 2 weeks to go in this season, for a lot of Giants fans, I'm sure the end cannot come quick enough. It seems like we're not going to see Davis Webb play, which I thought was kind of the only, excitement point left in the season on the table. But yeah, once this is over, I mean, it's a kind of a brave new world for the Giants. Major changes are going to happen, a whole new philosophy, a whole new leadership team, big decisions to make with Eli, with Odell, with a top 2 pick. It's going to be a very fascinating time for the Giants. It feels like we're kind of ramping down for a really big build-up and a lot to happen with this team. So I think that's it for us here on the 115th episode of the Talk is Cheap podcast. Man, only 15 episodes ago we were at Reds with Jonathan Casillas, and we thought this team was going to the playoffs and potentially the Super Bowl. Life moves fast, doesn't it? But that's it for us here. As always, thanks for listening. You can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and Spreaker. I got the list this time, so I didn't just tell you to go anywhere. And Dan, as always, thank you.
Yeah, good stuff. And I guess the next time we talk to people will be after the holidays. So, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everybody.
Yes. Happy holidays, everyone. We will be in Arizona. We will then try to get back home as soon as possible. And I'm sure we'll talk to you maybe around Tuesday or Wednesday. I'm not going to tape the podcast on Christmas Day. And then we'll be looking forward to the season finale against the Washington Redskins at MetLife Stadium. Maybe Eli Manning's last game as the Giants quarterback. We don't know. But that's it for us here. Thank you for listening to Talk is Cheap, and we'll see you next time.